Hello and welcome to lecture number 23, topic 3.8, the Constitutional Convention and Debates over Ratification. The theme that we're focusing on today is politics and power. There's one learning objective: explain the differing ideological positions on the structure and function of the federal government. So let's start with the Constitutional Convention. The key concept says delegates from the states participated in a constitutional convention and through negotiation, collaboration, and compromise proposed a constitution. The beginnings of this convention happened the year previous in 1786. There was supposed to be another convention at Annapolis in Maryland, in which they were going to address some of the economic problems that the Articles of Confederation were having, like the lack of power of taxation by the central government, the tariffs that the different states were putting on each other, hampering interstate commerce, and the lack of a common currency. But the problem in Annapolis was that not enough states sent delegates. They weren't able to have a convention because they did not have a quorum, that is, a majority in order to make changes. So they planned for the next year in 1787. They said, we're going to do this again, but instead of focusing on just economic issues, we're going to try and make more amendments to the Articles of Confederation. That's how it was portrayed at first. This was only going to be a change to the current articles. They were not proposing to create a new form of government. 12 out of the 13 states sent delegates, and the Constitution that comes out of the convention is based primarily on Madison's Virginia plan. It's got 3 branches of government and essentially throws out the existing model of government. As soon as James Madison got there, he knew in his head that they were going to have to start over from scratch, that trying to amend the Articles of Confederation was going to be too difficult, and then if they did manage to agree on something at the convention, getting those amendments passed would require a unanimous vote by all of the states, so it was better to just start from scratch. In meaning to write a new constitution, they were essentially overthrowing the current government and trying to put a new government in place. They had to do it secretly, so they met at the Pennsylvania State House in Philadelphia behind closed doors. One of the issues that the delegates had was over the size of the central government compared to the states, and also the amount of democracy that they would allow. At this time, democracy is still not seen as a positive thing the way that we see it today. They wanted to make sure that only the people that had a stake in the country and that had a certain level of education were the ones that were going to have the most power in government. In order to fix this issue or this debate on representation within the central government, we have the Connecticut Compromise. It settles the issue of representation with a bicameral legislature. It creates one house that is going to give delegates for every state based on the population size, so the states with a larger population are going to have more representatives, and the states with fewer people inside of them are going to have fewer delegates. And the other house, the one that we call the Senate, they are going to have 2 representatives go to that house regardless of the population size in every state. So, 2 houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate, together we call them Congress, and each of them is going to award delegates based on different criteria. The House based on the population size, and the Senate is going to give 2 automatic senators for every state. Another one of these compromises is the creation of the Electoral College. So the states wanted to continue to have some importance in the new form of government. In the old form of government, in the Articles of Confederation, the states were the most important part. They had the most power, and with the Constitution, they were going to have to give up a lot of it. So they wanted to retain some importance, and the way that they inject that importance into the Constitution is through the creation of the Electoral College. Every state is going to have a number of electoral votes equal to the amount of representatives and senators that they have. Those electoral votes are going to be cast for that state for the president. So the national popular vote is not going to directly impact the presidential election. It's only going to indirectly impact the presidential election because the Electoral College for each state votes for the candidate who wins the popular vote in that state, not for the popular vote winner of the entire country. Therefore, one person can win the national popular vote and still lose the presidential election. The next key concept is on compromises over slavery. The Constitutional Convention compromised over the representation of slave states in Congress and the role of the federal government in regulating both slavery and the slave trade, allowing the prohibition of the international slave trade after 1808. The first of these compromises that the Southern states asked for was the 3/5 Compromise. Now that representation in Congress was going to be based on population, the Southern states wanted all of the enslaved people in their states to count as people that would yield them more representation. The northern states balked at this. They said, how can you count them towards representation if you are taking away their rights? So the 3/5 Compromise stated that every enslaved person in a southern state or any state would count as 3/5 of a person for the methods to determine representation in the House of Representatives. The southern states wanted to have it both ways. They wanted to keep their enslaved population, and they also wanted that enslaved population to count towards their representation in Congress. They don't get everything they want, but the 3/5 formula is still going to be enough for the South to hold a disproportionate amount of political power on the backs of an exploited and disenfranchised population. The next compromise was one that was trying to secure human property for Southern states. The Fugitive Slave Clause in Article 4 guaranteed the return of a runaway if he or she crossed state lines. It is now guaranteed that just because a runaway enslaved person went to a different state, they were still technically in bondage. If they were caught, they would be returned back to their enslaver. Finally, the last compromise is the delay in banning the international slave trade. The clause states that the importation of enslaved people from abroad cannot be debated or legislated on for 20 years. Now, these compromises, as dehumanizing as they are, were necessary for the Southern states to agree upon the new Constitution. If these compromises were not there, it's unlikely that the Southern states would have gone along with the new Constitution, and they would have to revert back to the Articles of Confederation. We don't know exactly what it would have been like if they had not been put in place, but they certainly will have an impact for the next 70 years. And we continue to see the reverberations of these impacts in today's society. Now that the Constitution is written, all the compromises have been hammered out, there is going to be a debate over its ratification. The next key concept says, in the debates over ratifying the Constitution, anti-federalists opposing ratification battled with federalists whose principles were articulated in the Federalist Papers, primarily written by Alexander Hamilton and James Madison. The anti-federalists were the ones who did not want to ratify the Constitution. They wanted to keep things as they were with the Articles of Confederation. In that system, the states had more power, and they were scared of a central government that was too powerful. It was okay with them for the central government to be weak under the Articles. They believed that state sovereignty and individual liberties would be infringed if this new Constitution was ratified. They thought that by virtue of giving too much power to the central government, it would infringe upon individual liberties. There was no clause or no document inside of the Constitution that guaranteed specific individual liberties as they were accustomed to in other state constitutions. The only stated individual rights in the Constitution is habeas corpus and the denial of ex post facto laws. Other than that, there was no guarantee of individual liberties. They would have to rely on the Bill of Rights within the state constitutions or hope that there would be a Bill of Rights added to the Constitution later on. The Federalists are the ones who wanted the Constitution to be ratified. They will evolve into one of the first political parties in the new government. They believed that the central government needed to be stronger to improve the economy, to improve the defense of the United States, to fix all of the problems that they had seen under the Articles of Confederation. This establishes a new system of governing called federalism. That is one in which you have a strong central government that is responsible for certain tasks in society, and it divides those other tasks in society with the state governments. Whenever there is a conflict between the sovereignty of the state and the national government takes supremacy. The Federalists believed that federalism and the separation of powers within the Federalist system was enough in ensuring people against tyranny. They believed that the power had been subdivided so evenly and so effectively that it would be impossible for any one branch of any one group to take control of the government and act in a tyrannical way. All of this is vocalized through the Federalist Papers. There were 85 essays written by Madison, Hamilton, and John Jay under the pseudonym of Publius, that is Latin for voice of the people. The majority of these were written by Alexander Hamilton. They were printed across different states and newspapers to garner support. The Federalists had an advantage here in that most people who owned printing presses agreed with the viewpoint of the Federalist Papers, while not as many printers agreed with the Anti-Federalists. There was a set of Anti-Federalist papers that were printed as a response to the Federalist Papers under the pseudonym Brutus, the Roman who was the first to stab Caesar in defense of the Roman Republic. The symbolism would have been very obvious to the people reading the Anti-Federalist Papers, given that the Roman Republic was held as the standard for many of the founding leaders. The last part of this key concept says the Federalists ensured that the ratification of the Constitution by promising the addition of a Bill of Rights that enumerated individual rights and explicitly restricted the powers of the federal government. The Federalists assuaged the fears to what the Anti-Federalists were afraid of. They were afraid of individual liberties being infringed upon, and so therefore they say that if they ratify the Constitution, the very first thing that they will do is to write a Bill of Rights and ratify it to protect individual rights. It's not that the Federalists did not believe that individual rights were important, and it's not that they didn't think that was something that should have been part of the form of government. The reason why it wasn't included in the original draft of the Constitution is because they simply ran out of time in Philadelphia that summer in 1787. They had a lot to get through. The debates and the compromises took a long time, so therefore there was not enough time. In the first congressional session, there are 12 amendments of the Constitution that are introduced, and 10 of those amendments are ratified, all written by James Madison. Per Article 7 of the Constitution, only 9 out of the 13 states needed to ratify the new form of government. But it was critical that all 13 states would eventually ratify it, otherwise there would be some states that get left out. The political cartoon that you see on the bottom here was once drawn by Benjamin Franklin. Every time that a new state would ratify the Constitution, he would add another pillar to the little cartoon. You see in this one there's only 2 states that remain, North Carolina and Rhode Island. Here he is creating imagery that it's important that all the states that are ratifying the Constitution. He even includes some religious imagery as North Carolina is being lifted by some godly hand, and he's pointing to the importance of Rhode Island, also ratifying the Constitution, saying that the foundation good, it may yet be saved. He wants to make sure that Rhode Island has a chance to come in, and they eventually do ratify the Constitution in May of 1790. At this point, the first congressional session had already begun. Alright, here is your recap. The Constitution's final draft came out of many compromises. Southern states won many protections on slavery, specifically 3 of them. Federalist and Anti-Federalist emerged as 2 sides in the ratification debate. And finally, ratification was assured with the promise of a Bill of Rights. Thank you for watching. If you would like to watch the next lecture, you can click on the video link on the screen. And if you are looking for more practice to help you on the AP exam, you can visit APUSHslides.com. I wish you the very best in all of your studying and look forward to seeing you back on the next lecture.